So first of all, thank you very much. They were really powerful, they were really important, they were very serious and thoughtful speeches, and they were making it clear that climate and action on climate isn't something that kind of can sit at the side and be added on, and it's not something that can be greenwashed, but that it actually requires, and I think one of the words I'd underlined there was prioritisation. That needs to be a priority, and it being a priority means that you need to be changing economic policies, that you need to be challenging your policies on energy, that it needs to dig in deep into the actual way, and it came so strongly through. I think it was one of had the line about this is basically the seismic change in how we live, and it's a really big and not just how individuals live, but collectively. And there were lots of really interesting ideas, and people want to follow up on them and be engaged. So the ideas around transport, the idea of intra as well as inter, that it's not just about is there a bus to Dublin once a week or twice a week. It's a matter of inside your county, can you go between the towns? Can it be a place that you can plan in that way? And I think that was really good. And there's ideas about sustainable rural transport being something that's absolutely imaginable and already exists, be that ferries, be that trains or buses. Really good ideas there. And the congestion charge. So we're not looking that we're simply subsidising electric EVs for people who live in cities. That's not going to be the solution we need on transport. I was really struck by the comments on fashion. I think it was a really interesting analysis, and it's really relevant because there's two important pieces of legislation happening now. One in Ireland. We have the Circular Economy Bill, and that's legislation that we looked at as a committee, and it's going to be going through, and we need to be looking to say, what does that look like? And it's not just about recycling, it's actually about thinking about resources from the beginning, the emissions from the very start point of each ingredient in something, including fashion, and about the right to repair. So again, repair as a right that should come with things. And I think, and there's also on the EU level, a piece of important legislation which is around what they call due diligence. And that's a measure around how you measure supply chains all the way along. And that it's not strong enough at the moment. It doesn't cover enough companies. There's a lot of loopholes which needs to be strengthened. But those are really important sets of decisions. And there are over 200 new pieces of environmental legislation going to be happening in the next 2 to 3 years from EU level, many of which will have an effect in Ireland. And how we interpret them matters. And your specific ideas are really important because they help make sure we interpret them in the strongest way. I wanted to come back though to something else that Kamal Mustafa, you said, you spoke about the fashion piece, but something I really struck, the idea of that challenge of being a good person in a bad system. And what's really clear, it's not simply enough that we have kind of motivational talks and tell people to be good people when we have bad systems. And it is our responsibility to change systems. And it's something you can push for and demand for and call for, but also we need to step up and do it. And that's, I think, really interesting, the systemic changes that you have identified. The fact that it's not simply enough to even put the emotional burden of feeling, what can I do as an individual, and it's all about how I spend my money. And for many people, they won't have a lot of money to spend in any way, be it sustainable or not, because they're trying to manage basic things. But that kind of change, and that's what I think I'm going to take certainly from this. And I'd be really interested in more comments you had on that. Somebody made a point about the Climate Action Fund, that it's 500 million, it should be 10 times that. And when we look to how much we subsidise fossil fuels, and again, we hear a lot about how do we make green energy affordable, and how do we I think personally we should be investing in renewable energy, not nuclear. We could do, if we put as much as other countries have put into nuclear, and as much as we subsidise fossil fuels into renewable energy in the next 5 to 10 years, that could be radical and transformative. But we know, for example, Ireland subsidises jet kerosene for planes to 600 million every year, yet the Climate Action Fund is just 500 million. So I'd love your ideas. If we took that suggestion, and if it was 10 times more, what 5 billion would look like in the next 2 to 3 years of radical ideas, because I think that's the kind of demand we need to have, and I'm really interested in that. I'm going to finish finally with the last question on just transition. All of you spoke about climate justice and just transition, or many of you spoke about it, and I think the really important thing is that just transition and maybe I'd like your thoughts on this, that just transition isn't simply let's keep business as usual because it's too hard to change. Be that burning peat or be that anything else. But just transition is about front-loading investment in change, that idea of just transition as both fast and fair. I mean, the fact we heard that over a decade ago, the damage industrial peat was doing, we had reports on it, and yet it's left now suddenly to individuals a decade later instead of us using that decade to make the change. So again, your thoughts on just transition, what fast but fair looks like, what public investment that was transformative would look like to help those who will not be able to make it individually as a change. And then lastly, on the islands and climate justice, I was really struck by, I thought it was a really powerful piece about islands, about island nations, and it reminded me, and I think it was mentioned in some of the Irish text of your speech, Maud, Mia Motley, who talked about 2 degrees as a death sentence for islands, for the Caribbean islands. And the idea of that kind of Ireland, if it has that human rights voice and record, if we have the experience of being colonised, for example, in the past, as well as being part of the wealthy nations of the world now, what we can do in terms of the climate justice piece, if there's comments on that from any of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Higgins. There's 3 sets of speakers and observations and some questions. If anybody wants to come back in to respond, you're more than welcome now, or I can continue with the members and come out. Do you want to come back in there?
I would like to come in on Senator Higgins' comments on the just transition and also on Mia Motley's words of 2 degrees being a death sentence for island nations in the Caribbean. And I think that the two of just transition and also Mia Motley's comments can be seen together, because it's not just a just transition in Ireland, it's a just transition globally. And that means wealthy countries like Ireland contributing more and having to adapt more quickly. We need to cut our emissions faster than countries that are still developing, and many of which are very vulnerable to climate change. So we have a responsibility as a wealthy nation to take action, not just for ourselves, but for every country in the world, particularly those that are most vulnerable. And I think that fast and fair climate action is something that is not just trying to continue the status quo without carbon emissions. It's trying to use this to make the world a better place, as cliche as it sounds, and to, while we're changing, make it more equal, make equal changes. We have the opportunity to make huge changes to our system, to how we live, how we work, and that opportunity needs to be taken to make the world more equal, and obviously to help countries and societies that are struggling. So that's very important, and thank you, Senator Higgins, for bringing that up.
Thank you, Maud. Well said. I'll go to Kumal now.
So I'd like to cover the idea behind material waste and how we can reduce it, and then, as well as just being a good person in a bad system. It's a matter of, I'm going to be nihilistic here, I don't know if we can change human behaviour. That's something that's quite frankly, in my opinion, just really difficult to do. But what we can do is we can educate consumers on what they are buying, which is, I think, one of the most necessary things that we have to do, as well as making it easier for them to take the other opportunities, such as when I walk into my local store to do my grocery shopping every week, I shouldn't have to pick up vegetables that are covered within 2 or 3 layers of plastic. I should be able to pick out fresh fruits and vegetables without having to, the environmental impact of that being near impossible to actually get past. As well as that, the right to repair Senator Higgins brought up. When I go and spend €1,000 on a new phone, I should have the right to be able to replace the battery should it A, start to deteriorate, or B, if the screen cracks slightly, I should be able to find replacements easily, not have to go out to a specific store and shell out another probably €200, €300 just to get it fixed. I think those are the main key things, is that we, as consumers, need to be educated and be given the opportunities to be better people, while the corporations are stopped from taking measures that are anti-consumerist, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Leo, go ahead.
More to, I suppose, work on what I've said so far is nuclear energy would not be a save-all and a big solution to our problem. The issue we have is that we're putting our eggs in one basket, if it were to make sense. We need to invest in several different types of sustainable energy to become more self-reliant, like we've stated in many other of the statements. Even we've mentioned hydrogen energy or biofuels would be amazing investments as well. But we can't rely on a single source. We should continue investment into renewables, but renewables needs more research to improve it because there are still problems and deficits within renewable energy. Within nuclear energy, there are also many deficits and many issues that need to be solved there. And as far as hydrogen energy and biofuels, there needs to be a lot more research there as well. But it's a matter of going into each different sector and investing in each one to find which one would suit or which combination would suit us and not relying on a single source.